You think crisis changes people. It doesn't. It reveals them. When uncertainty rises, when headlines spike, when tension builds, you don't suddenly become someone new. You become more of who you already are. The way you react during uncertainty says something deeper about your psychology. It says something about what your mind is trying to protect. And most people don't realize their reaction is actually revealing their coping style. Let's look at the patterns. Right now, millions of people are reacting to uncertainty in very different ways. Some are glued to the news. Some are preparing for the worst. Some are avoiding everything completely. And most people assume these reactions are just habits. But they're not. They're psychological coping styles. And once you notice them, you start seeing them everywhere. Sometimes even in yourself. One of the most common reactions shows up in people who constantly check the news. If you're refreshing headlines every few minutes, you probably tell yourself something like, "I just want to stay informed." But staying informed and staying activated are not the same thing. Your nervous system isn't actually searching for information. It's searching for control. Every refresh gives the brain a small sense of certainty, even if the news is negative. Because uncertainty feels worse than bad information, so the brain keeps checking. Not because it wants updates, but because it wants the feeling of being prepared, and preparation feels powerful, even when it doesn't change anything. Another reaction shows up in people who immediately start planning, stockpiling supplies, creating backup plans, thinking through worst-case scenarios. On the surface, this looks responsible, but sometimes it's not preparation. Sometimes it's fear disguised as productivity. Planning creates the illusion that you can outsmart uncertainty. It makes anxiety feel like strategy. But notice something interesting. The more uncertain the world feels, the stronger the need to believe you are in control. And that need for control isn't just practical, it's psychological. Because feeling unprepared threatens how we see ourselves. Planning restores that sense of identity. Then there are people who react in the opposite way. They stop checking everything, they avoid the news. They disengage from the topic completely. They say things like, "I'm protecting my peace." And sometimes that's true. But sometimes avoidance isn't peace. It's emotional shutdown. Because if you don't look at something, you don't have to feel it. Avoidance protects emotional stability, but it also prevents emotional processing. And that reveals something important. It shows how the mind sometimes chooses distance instead of discomfort. Another set of people respond differently. Instead of reacting emotionally, they turn everything into analysis. They study history. They analyze geopolitics. They discuss probabilities and strategic outcomes. It feels rational. It feels mature. But sometimes intellectualizing is simply another form of distance. If you reduce everything to logic, you don't have to confront fear. You don't have to acknowledge uncertainty. You turn emotion into theory. And that allows you to preserve an identity built around being rational. Another pattern appears in people who immediately assume the worst. They mentally simulate disasters. They imagine worst-case outcomes. They project months or years into the future. Their brain believes that imagining disaster early will somehow prepare them for it. But catastrophizing rarely creates readiness. Instead, it creates exhaustion. Because the brain is running threat simulations non-stop. Catastrophic thinking feels like preparation, but in reality, it drains the very mental resources you need to stay calm during uncertainty. And often it reflects something deeper, a long-standing belief that the world is fundamentally unsafe. Then there's another reaction that often goes unnoticed. Some people remain extremely calm, almost too calm. They pride themselves on not reacting, on being steady, on staying above panic. But here's an uncomfortable question. Is that calmness regulation? Or is it emotional distance? Sometimes calm is genuine strength, but sometimes calm is suppression, a refusal to let uncertainty touch you emotionally. And even that is a psychological defense. If you look at all these reactions together, a pattern becomes clear. Checking the news, planning for worst cases, avoiding the topic, analyzing everything logically, imagining disasters, or appearing completely calm. None of these reactions are random. They're protection strategies. Your mind is trying to protect something. Your sense of control, your sense of safety, your self-image, your emotional stability. Crisis doesn't create your coping style. It exposes it. And exposure is uncomfortable. Because once you recognize your pattern, you can't pretend it's just circumstance anymore. So the real question isn't, why am I reacting like this? The deeper question is, what part of me is this reaction protecting? Once you understand that, you start seeing your behavior differently. Crisis doesn't change people, it reveals them. And if this made you slightly uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you recognize something real. If you want more psychology that explains human behavior without softening the truth, you'll find it here.